Most pilots think about wings, engines, and airspeed, but in backcountry flying, the landing gear becomes a much bigger part of the story. And Tony has grown his shock monster TK1 business by creating innovative airplane solutions. Later we will talk a lot more about the business, but let's start with how shocks are making backcountry flying a lot more accessible. Until recently, traditional small airplanes used off-airport used either bungee or oleo type shocks for dampening the landing. But when the runway turns into grass, dirt, gravel, river bars, and uneven ground, absorbing the landing is only part of the problem. The real trick is controlling what happens after the airplane touches down. That's where modern shock systems change the way these airplanes behave on the ground. And that's why this story is interesting. This is Tony's Legend Cub, but the bigger story here is how off-road racing, shock engineering, backcountry flying, and experimental aviation all ended up in the same hangar.
Hey guys, I'm Tony, CEO of TK1 Racing and Shock Monster Suspension. We're in Lincoln, California.
Tony is one of those airport people who has his hand in everything: flying, fabrication, engineering, backcountry airplanes, and experimental aviation. But his path into aviation did not start with backcountry flying. It started with something much more personal.
My flying career is a little unique. I didn't really ever desire to be a pilot. My dad passed away when I was young, and that was always kind of one of his passions. He always wanted to learn to fly. He was always super interested in airplanes. And upon his death, I decided to start taking flying lessons. So kind of learned to fly sort of young in life. Then life kind of gets in the way of your flying career. I married a woman who was scared to death of airplanes and motorcycles, so got rid of the motorcycles, didn't fly airplanes for a long time. Many years later, we separate, and I bought a motorcycle the next day and started flying airplanes again. So that's kind of my pathway into aviation. Started like everybody else did, flew a Cessna and turned into a little bit faster airplanes. And being a bush plane pilot it wasn't on the radar at all. I was an off-road race truck guy. My daughter was playing sports in Southern California, so we were commuting to SoCal all the time in an airplane. That was really kind of the mission of an airplane for the longest time.
At this point, aviation was useful. It was transportation, it was family, it was getting places. Then a friend sent him a video.
A friend of mine sends me a YouTube video late one night, just says, hey, I thought this was kind of cool. And it was a just aircraft super stall with big long shocks hanging off the side of it. I saw the video and I was like, oh, he's using a Fox air shock on an airplane. That's kind of cool. And then I watched the video for a little while and realized that they didn't have any idea how to revalve the shocks for that application. So I reached out to Troy at Just Aircraft and just said, hey, you don't know me, I'm a shock engineer from California, big fan, and if you'd like some help revalving the shocks you're using, I'm willing to assist.
That's the key moment. Most of us would have watched that video and seen a cool airplane. Tony saw a suspension problem and wanted to help get it fixed.
So it turned out that Fox did not want shocks on airplanes at all because of the liability. So he needed a shock supplier, and we make shocks for off-road. So one thing led to another, and we still build shocks for Troy still to this day.
That one message became the bridge between two worlds: off-road racing suspension and backcountry aviation. But to understand why Tony could see the problem so quickly, you have to go back before the airplanes. Before Shock Monster was building aviation parts, Tony was racing off-road.
Yes, so my pathway into suspension and shocks for airplanes actually started in off-road. Desert raced early in life, then rock crawling championship for another 10 years after that. And super fortunate. We had really good sponsors, but we never had a suspension sponsor. And races and off-road really has a lot to do with suspension. So we couldn't afford to get any factory support. So we had to figure out how to take a Fox shock and turn it into something cooler than what it was out of the box.
That is one of the fun parts of Tony's story. He didn't learn shocks as theory. He learned them because if the suspension didn't work, the truck didn't survive.
I said, you know what, screw this, I'm going to go build my own shocks. So 2001, we started building our own in-house shocks for off-road. So we had almost a dozen years of off-road shocks only before we ever got into airplane shocks.
That off-road background matters because backcountry flying has a similar problem. The surface is not controlled, and when the airplane touches down, the gear has to do more than just take the hit. It has to control the energy, keep the tires planted, and help the airplane track straight over rough ground. This is where shock valving, stroke, rebound control, weight, and geometry start to matter.
It's a different kind of flying. It's very tight quarters, over trees, winds are changing all the time, gravel bars, things like that you're landing on all the time.
So this isn't just about making a Cub look tougher, it changes how the airplane behaves where the pavement ends.
That was our segue into airplanes, which also was our segue into me getting into backcountry flying. I bought a Just Aircraft Summit, which was a tandem 2-seat early model aircraft. I flew that for, I don't know, 5 or 8 years.
Eventually, the backcountry business led Tony to the airplane sitting behind us. But even the Legend Cub story started with Tony being skeptical.
I'd been to Oshkosh, 20 times. I'd seen tons of Legend Cubs there, and they were all yellow, J3s basically. And so a friend reaches out and says he's buying this, this badass Legend Cub. And I was like, man, they make yellow J3s. He was like, no, they build other airplanes also. And I'm like, well, I've never seen one. And he buys me a ticket and kidnaps me one day. And we fly to Texas and we drive out to Sulphur Springs. It's way out in the middle of East Texas, and a cute little quaint town. Get to the airport, and it turns out they don't just make yellow J3s. They make really badass Super Cubs also. So walking through the factory and seeing how they build airplanes is how I would build an airplane. They're all TIG welded fuselages. There's no MIG welding in that shop at all. All the assembly is spectacular. It's a very, very family type company. I did a factory assist build, which means that I've got to go donate a bunch of time and effort into my own airplane. But there's tons of other owners doing it there all the time. So I become super good friends with everybody. Even when I go back today, Legend Aircraft is obviously a pretty good sized customer of ours. Everybody goes to lunch with each other. Everybody has wonderful dinners with each other. Super, super family.
Tony built this Cub around the same priorities that show up in his business: lightweight, useful performance, strong gear, and practical backcountry details.
Yeah, Catto 82-inch ground adjustable. We build the hubs, they build the blades. Great cruise speed, so I'm going about 110 miles an hour in a Cub. Great off the ground still. Obviously all of our gear on it. It's got a Carbon Concepts carbon fiber pod on the bottom. Every Cub needs that. Throw all your dirty stuff at the bottom. Just tried to build the lightest airplane I could. Spent just under 1,000 pounds. A Titan 340. It's Betterment exhaust. Dual electronic ignition.
The more time you spend around Tony's shop, the more you realize Shock Monster is not just a bush plane accessory company. This is a manufacturing business built around solving specific problems for specific aircraft.
Yeah, so every day there's something new going on here. Product development is really what we focus on here. A lot of process changes over the last probably 6 years also. So we brought all manufacturing in-house. We're stacked with CNC equipment in here. We use pretty much exclusively Haas gear for everything. We run a lot of automation here. The last 6 months we brought heat treat in-house. So now we do all of our own heat treat in-house. We powder coat in-house, we Cerakote in-house, but still the bulk of the shop is CNC mill and lathe parts. In any given week, it seems like there's a new aircraft suspension going on. We build Cub Cabane style gear for 105 models in GA. Most people couldn't even, if I gave them a year, they couldn't come up with 105 models in GA.
That number surprised me because most pilots can name a few Cub-style airplanes. Tony's shop is building for aircraft most of us have never even heard of. And then there's one project a lot of experimental aviation people are watching closely, the Van's RV-15.
Yeah, the RV-15 project's another one that we're wrapping up design and modeling for right now. Yeah, the landing gear for the RV-15 is very unique. With the shocks are tucked inside, so everything is out of the wind. So we need to pay attention to all the extra little things, like can you get all the hardware in immediately? Can you get them in and out? What's the service life of that type of shock? Since you're not going to see it most of the time. Built all the prototypes for them. We do the tail wheel assembly for them. We do the main gear shocks for them. They're trying to build a fast bush plane, and they're really about the flight characteristics of the airplane. And Vans is just a spectacular company to work with. They build by far the nicest kits. This airplane was designed in a computer before they ever started bending any sheet metal up for it. We have a couple of RV-15 kits actually sitting at this airport right now, so it's kind of cool to see. Obviously, we're in the factory quite a bit, so we can see the factory side of it, but it's pretty cool to see it show up in a crate, offloaded for a customer, and watch them start peeling it apart, getting ready to put that airplane together.
Speaking of new products Tony's team is working on.
So we started building propeller hubs for Catto about 3 years ago now. They build all the blades. We build all the aluminum hub housings. It's not a secret they're building a 320 electric and a 360 hydraulic 2 and 3 blade be out shortly.
And if that's not enough, Shock Monster is expanding into a brand new business area.
This week we're working on wheels for aircraft. So we're designing our own line of wheels, tires, and brakes for aircraft. So that's this week's project.
We could talk for weeks about Tony's business, but what about Tony the pilot?
I've kind of wanted to fly everything and figure out what my passion was going to be. Started with normal 172s, and then I bought a Grumman AA1, and that got me into formation flying. I did about 1,000 hours of formation flying, and I got to say, that's probably some of the most technical flying I've ever done. Pretty neat. So I did helicopters for quite a while, did glider flying out of Truckee. Funny factoid about me, I'm scared to death of heights. Flying an R-22 is scary enough. Flying an R-22 with no doors on it, next level scary for me. So I have to fly my Cub with the doors and windows closed, or I swear I will fall out of the airplane.
The funny thing is this airplane looks simple, and in some ways that's the whole point. But underneath it is a lot of thinking about how an airplane behaves when the landing surface is not smooth, not predictable, and not always forgiving. After listening to Tony for a while, the flight feels different. You're not just looking at a Cub with big tires, you're looking at an airplane shaped by Tony's entire path. Off-road racing, shock design, backcountry flying, manufacturing, and a lot of trial and error. You know, the best stories aren't just about the airplane. They're about the strange path that led someone to build it, fly it, and make it part of a much bigger life that in this case changed fun aviation and the accessibility of backcountry flying. Since you made it this far, let's add one more fun little story. And by the way, Tony, I got to ask, what about the Boston Red Sox hat?
Oh, the Red Sox hat, yeah. So I've always been a Red Sox fan. Grew up as a Red Sox fan, even though I grew up in California. So I grew up super, super poor, latchkey kid, always home alone. Loved sports, and the only games I could ever watch were kind of the games of the week because the A's and the Giants were always blacked out. So they never sold out, so I never got to watch local games. So I grew up watching the Red Sox and the Yankees, and I hated the way the Yankees played. So I had to be a Boston Red Sox fan.
I want to thank Tony for the flight, for the shop tour, for showing us a part of backcountry aviation that most people never really get to see. Make sure to subscribe so that you can be notified when my next Silva adventure comes out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next Silva adventure.